Imagine a massive, like a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate decides to build a data center the exact geographic size of a small American city right in your backyard.
Right, which is happening more and more.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking about an infrastructure project pulling down more raw electricity than, a million homes combined.
Oh, easily.
So naturally, you would assume your local utility bill is about to skyrocket to subsidize all those new power lines. But then the federal government steps in and legally guarantees your personal power bill will not go up by a single solitary cent.
It's a bold promise.
Or picture this. A law that makes it a federally actionable offense for a government official to even politely ask an artificial intelligence CEO to take down a politically damaging, highly deceptive piece of content.
I mean, it sounds like a series of completely disconnected, almost contradictory legal hypotheticals.
Oh, yeah?
You have the government aggressively intervening to protect your wallet in one breath, and then completely handcuffing its own ability to police the flow of information in the next.
Right. But these aren't hypotheticals. These are the actual, literal stakes of what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are welcoming you, the listener, to a highly focused, highly detailed exploration of a brand new, incredibly anticipated document that is, well, it's trying to write the rules for the most disruptive technology of our lifetime.
Absolutely.
Today, we are opening up the National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence Legislative Recommendations.
And it is a truly sweeping, monumental text. We aren't just looking at, like, a few suggestions for how to code better software. We're looking at a fundamental rewiring of American policy.
To give you the immediate context, this source material is a comprehensive, 7-part legislative blueprint. It details exactly how the federal government, specifically the administration, wants Congress to handle the artificial intelligence revolution.
It is essentially the architect's master plan handed over to the builders.
Yeah. It covers everything from shielding children and artists from digital abuse to literally figuring out how to pour the concrete and lay the copper wire for the massive data centers this tech requires.
Right, the physical reality of it all.
Exactly. And it culminates in an absolutely massive, high-stakes turf war aimed at blocking individual states from writing their own tech laws.
It is attempting to build the airplane while the airplane is already flying at Mach 5. And, understanding the contours of this landscape is critical for you because the implications of this framework are going to touch every single aspect of how you interact with the modern world moving forward.
Now, before we jump in, a quick but very important note to you, the listener. This document contains specific political initiatives and partisan considerations. It explicitly mentions the Trump administration and First Lady Melania Trump.
Right. It's right there in the text.
Yeah. Our goal today is to impartially report on the exact content provided in this framework. We're not taking sides or endorsing any political viewpoints. We are simply acting as your guides to convey the ideas contained in the original source material so you can understand the policy landscape.
That neutrality is vital because the actual mechanics of what this framework proposes are fascinating enough on their own. If we look at the core tension of the document, the big aha promise underlying all 7 sections, it's this. The United States is trying to strike an incredibly delicate, almost precarious balance.
A balancing act between what and what?
Well, on one side of the scale, there is an absolute uncompromising drive toward aggressive, unquestioned global AI dominance. The framework wants to bulldoze barriers, build monumental physical infrastructure, and let American developers innovate as fast as the laws of physics will allow.
But on the other side of that scale, there's this acute, very grounded awareness that this technology can and will cause immediate, tangible harm to individual American citizens if left entirely unchecked.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how the blueprint attempts to solve this inherent tension.
Yeah.
It doesn't do it by creating a massive new web of government bureaucracy.
Right, which is usually the go-to move.
Yeah, exactly. It achieves this balance largely by deciding what the federal government and the state governments shouldn't do, rather than strictly dictating what they must do. It's regulation by strategic retreat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because regulating by stepping back is a massive philosophical stance. But before we get into the macro-level economics or international AI dominance or the geopolitics of microchips, we have to start where the impact of artificial intelligence is the most immediate.
The human element.
Yes, the most visceral and the most personal. We need to look at how this framework addresses the direct threat to the human element, specifically the most vulnerable populations among us.
Is precisely where the document begins. It doesn't start with corporate tax rates. It starts with a section titled Protecting Children and Empowering Parents.
Oh, wow. Right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate. And it issues a very clear foundational declaration. AI services and platforms must take affirmative measures to protect children while simultaneously empowering parents to actually control their children's digital environment.
And the framework gets very granular about how Congress should achieve that. It calls on lawmakers to explicitly build on the actions taken to date by the Trump administration to protect children.
Specifically highlighting the historical importance of the Take It Down Act.
Right. The document notes that this was a key initiative of First Lady Melania Trump, and its primary driving goal is to protect both children and adult victims from the trauma of deepfake abuse.
This is such a crucial grounding point for the entire document. Whenever we talk about AI safety in the broader cultural conversation, it almost inevitably drifts into these abstract Hollywood sci-fi scenarios about, rogue supercomputers taking over the nuclear grid.
The Terminator scenarios.
Exactly. But this framework ignores the sci-fi and grounds the very first legislative recommendation in an immediate, terrifying, and currently happening reality: the non-consensual generation of intimate or abusive images using artificial intelligence. The deepfake.
It is the absolute darkest application of generative AI. I mean, you take a tool that is miraculously capable of creating any high-definition image from a simple text prompt, and within seconds, bad actors weaponize it to victimize real people.
It's awful.
The Take It Down Act initiative is presented here as the foundational building block for human protection. The framework is essentially telling Congress, we started this vital work to give victors a concrete legal and technological mechanism to remove this horrifying content from the internet, and now you, the lawmakers, need to expand on it.
And importantly, it demands an expansion from the reactive to the proactive. Taking things down after they have already been generated and shared is necessary, but it's treating the symptom.
Right. The damage is already done at that point.
Exactly. The framework asks Congress to focus on the root cause by empowering parents and guardians with robust, proactive tools. It explicitly lists the need for tools that manage children's privacy settings, control screen time, filter content exposure, and dictate account controls.
Right. It wants parents physically in the driver's seat of the technology. But this brings up a massive logistical nightmare. We get into the actual mechanics of how a digital platform, living on a server farm in a different state, actually knows who is a child and who is a parent.
Which is incredibly hard to prove online.
Right. The framework states that Congress should establish commercially reasonable, privacy-protective, age assurance requirements, and it gives a very specific example in parentheses right in the text, such as parental attestation. It wants these requirements applied to any AI platforms and services that are likely to be accessed by minors.
Which is where the abstract policy rubber meets the very bumpy technological road. Age assurance is arguably one of the most hotly debated and technologically difficult topics in the entire sphere of tech regulation.
For sure.
How do you definitively prove that the person sitting at the keyboard is under 18 or under 13 without completely and utterly destroying the digital privacy of every single adult on the internet?
Hold on, this makes no sense. I have to interject here, because if these AI platforms are legally required to verify the ages of their users, aren't they inherently being forced to hoover up more sensitive data on kids?
I see where you're going.
Like, if my kid wants to use a new AI math tutor, and the platform makes me upload my driver's license, or run a biometric face scan, or even just sign a digital attestation verifying their exact birth date, that platform is now permanently storing a permanent record linking my identity to my child's age. Isn't that doing the exact opposite of protecting their privacy?
It is a brilliant observation, and it highlights a massive structural paradox in digital regulation. And it is exactly why the framework includes the very next crucial recommendation. It recognizes that tension and builds a firewall.
A firewall? How so?
Well, while demanding age assurance, the framework explicitly demands that Congress must affirm that all existing child privacy protections completely apply to AI systems. But it doesn't stop at a vague affirmation. It spells out exactly what that means in practice.
Which is what?
Strict, non-negotiable limits on data collection for model training and targeted advertising.
So it's a trade-off. It's the government saying, look, you absolutely must figure out how old the user is so you can turn on the safety filters, but you absolutely cannot use that age data or any of the conversations that child has with the chatbot to train the next version of your massive language model.
Yes.
And you definitely cannot use it to sell them customized ads for video games.
Precisely. If we connect this to the deeper underlying mechanics of how generative AI actually works, these frontier models are incredibly data hungry. They only get smarter by consuming everything we feed them.
Everything is food for the algorithm.
Exactly. Every text prompt, every corrected math problem, every casual conversation is potential training data. The framework is attempting to build an impermeable firewall around the cognitive data of children. If a 12-year-old interacts with an AI to help write a history paper, the specific syntax, thoughts, and personal details in that conversation cannot become part of the training corpus for version 2.0 of the AI model.
And regarding the method of that age assurance, I want to go back to that phrase they use, commercially reasonable, and the specific suggestion of parental attestation. It feels very deliberate.
Oh, it absolutely is.
It feels like the authors of the blueprint are acutely aware of the privacy concerns and are desperately trying to avoid a dystopian scenario where every internet user has to scan their passport just to ask a chatbot for a recipe.
Right, which would kill the industry overnight.
Exactly. Parental attestation essentially means I, as the parent, basically click a legally binding box or sign a digital form affirming that I am the adult and I consent to my teenager using the platform.
Yes, and the inclusion of the phrase commercially reasonable is a massive flashing neon signal to the tech industry. It means the federal government isn't going to ask for a military-grade cryptographic biometric verification that would instantly bankrupt a small tech startup or fundamentally break the frictionless user experience that the internet relies on.
That makes sense.
But, and this is the crucial counterbalance, it also explicitly states that these platforms must implement features that definitively reduce the risks of sexual exploitation and self-harm to minors. So whatever tools they use, even if they rely on simple attestation, they have to actually work.
But the framework also includes a very stark, almost ominous warning to Congress about how they should rate these specific safety rules. It says lawmakers must avoid setting ambiguous standards about permissible content or open-ended liability that could give rise to excessive litigation.
This is a classic historical legislative trap, and the framework is trying to preempt it before the ink even hits the paper. Think about how difficult it is to legally define the word harmful.
It's totally subjective.
Right. If Congress passes a well-intentioned law that simply says AI platforms are financially liable if they display harmful content to minors, without strictly and scientifically defining what harmful means, what is the immediate real-world result?
Complete chaos. Every single AI platform gets sued into oblivion within 24 hours. You would have parents from different political backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, all filing massive class action lawsuits because they disagree with how an AI chatbot answered a historical question about the Civil War or a scientific question about biology.
The trial lawyers would have an absolute field day.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Open-ended liability would instantly paralyze the entire domestic AI industry. If the operational cost of serving an AI model to a teenager is the constant looming threat of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit over an entirely subjective and ambiguous standard, the developers won't bother trying to comply.
They just block kids entirely.
Yes, they will just geo-block everyone under the age of 18 entirely, or they will heavily censor the AI so severely that it becomes completely useless for education or creativity. The framework is demanding extreme precision from Congress. Protect the kids, yes, but write the legal definitions tightly enough that you don't unleash a tsunami of bad faith litigation that destroys the industry.
And just to put a bow on this section regarding the vulnerable, the framework also explicitly tells Congress not to preempt states from enforcing their own generally applicable laws protecting children.
Which is an important carve-out.
Yeah, it specifically mentions state-level prohibitions on child sexual abuse material, noting that these local laws absolutely still apply even when such horrific material is generated entirely by an algorithm rather than a camera. We are going to get into a massive, sprawling turf war between the states and the federal government later in this deep dive, but right here, for child protection, the framework steps back and says, states, keep doing your jobs.
It is a vital and deeply necessary carve-out. Basic criminal law regarding child exploitation remains firmly intact and enforceable at the local and state level, regardless of how sophisticated the technology used to commit the crime becomes.
So we've established the protective layer for the youngest among us, but the framework immediately pivots to another highly vulnerable demographic, seniors. And it ties the threat directly back to the exact same underlying generative technology that enables those deepfakes.
The voice cloning.
Yeah. The framework explicitly calls on Congress to augment existing law enforcement efforts and resources to actively combat AI-enabled impersonation scams and fraud that specifically target vulnerable populations such as seniors.
What's truly fascinating here is the evolution of the mechanism of the crime. The concept of the grandparent scam is not new. It has existed for decades.
Right, we've all heard those stories.
Someone calls an elderly person on the landline, claims to be their grandchild, says they're stranded in a foreign country or locked in a jail cell, and frantically asks for wire transfers or untraceable gift cards. But historically, the scammer was just a stranger putting on an act.
Right.
The senior citizen had to be significantly confused or hard of hearing or just caught in a moment of extreme panic to fall for a voice they didn't actually recognize.
But now, the game has completely changed. With just a 3-second audio clip, maybe pulled from a public social media video the grandchild posted months ago, a relatively cheap AI tool can perfectly clone that grandchild's voice, the exact inflection, the specific regional accent, even their unique laugh.
Precisely. As these frontier AI models become more capable and vastly more accessible to the general public, the traditional barrier to entry for highly personalized, incredibly convincing fraud drops effectively to zero.
Wow.
A scammer doesn't need to be a skilled actor or a smooth talker anymore. They literally just type a script into an AI voice cloner and the software generates the emotion and the panic flawlessly.
That is terrifying.
It is. The framework recognizes a critical reality. Yes, existing fraud laws are already on the books. It's already illegal to steal money. But local and federal law enforcement agencies desperately need augmented resources, new tracking technologies, and updated training to deal with the sheer scale, the unbelievable speed, and the terrifying sophistication of these new AI-enabled impersonation scams. We are looking at a completely different volume and quality of criminal enterprise.
It's a chilling reality. So we've clearly established the human stakes. The framework demands that we build legal walls to protect children's privacy and cognitive development and to protect seniors' life savings from the synthetic outputs of AI.
What?
But to actually build the highly capable frontier models that power all of the systems that are so unfathomably powerful that we have to draft new federal blueprints to legislate against their misuse, you need a lot more than just clever coding and smart mathematicians. You need massive, unbelievable amounts of physical power. You need data centers that look like small cities.
Yes, this is the crucial transition from the ethereal world of software to the brutal physical reality of hardware and thermodynamics.
Which brings us to the infrastructure, the energy, and the macroeconomics of the artificial intelligence revolution. How does this framework propose we actually power this technological leap? The blueprint states that AI development, specifically including the massive data infrastructure build-out, must strengthen American communities through economic growth and what it calls energy dominance.
Energy dominance is an incredibly loaded, very intentional policy phrase.
Yeah.
You have to understand just how incredibly energy-intensive generative AI actually is.
Just to run the servers, right?
Exactly. Training a single state-of-the-art frontier model doesn't happen on a laptop. It requires tens of thousands of highly specialized, incredibly expensive computer chips running at absolute maximum capacity 24 hours a day for months on end. Even after the model is trained, just processing a single simple query on an AI chatbot uses significantly more raw electricity than a standard internet search. If the United States is going to fulfill the framework's overarching goal of leading the world in AI, it needs an unprecedented, almost wartime-level mobilization of new electrical generation.
And that reality leads directly to one of the most fascinating, hyper-specific, and frankly surprising details in this entire document. The framework demands that Congress adhere to what it officially titles the Ratepayer Protection Pledge.
This is huge.
It explicitly states that lawmakers must ensure that everyday residential ratepayers do not experience increased electricity costs as a result of new AI data center construction and operation.
This is a massive, incredibly bold political promise to make to the American public.
Let me stretch out an analogy here, because when I first read this section, I honestly couldn't comprehend how it would work in the real world.
Go for it.
It is essentially like a massive, deeply energy-hungry industrial factory. Let's say a giant aluminum smelting plant announcing they're moving into your quiet suburban neighborhood. They are going to draw incredible grid-straining amounts of power from the local utility. but the town government looks you in the eye and guarantees that your personal home electric bill will not go up by a single cent to subsidize their massive power usage or to pay for the new high-voltage power lines needed to connect them to the grid. How is that physically, logically, or economically possible?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how the American electrical grid fundamentally operates, it is historically a socialized cost system.
Okay.
When a massive new residential subdivision is built, or a new manufacturing plant opens its doors, the local utility company has to upgrade the regional substations, build new transmission lines, and increase baseline power generation. And historically, the capital costs of those massive infrastructure upgrades are eventually baked into the base utility rate for everyone living within that utility's geographic footprint.
So we all pay for it eventually.
Exactly. The framework is looking at the staggering power needs of AI and saying, absolutely not. AI developers cannot pass the multi-billion-dollar buck of grid expansion to everyday citizens trying to run their dishwashers.
So if these tech giants are legally prevented from taxing the existing grid infrastructure to the point where it raises residential rates, where do they actually get the electricity to turn the servers on?
The framework provides the exact mechanical solution in the very next bullet point. It says Congress must urgently streamline federal permitting for AI infrastructure construction so that AI developers can develop or procure on-site and behind-the-meter power generation.
Okay, behind the meter. That sounds like deep utility industry jargon. What does that actually mean for the listener trying to picture this?
Behind the meter means the electrical power generation is located physically on the exact same plot of land as the facility consuming the power.
Oh, I see.
The electricity never passes through the public utilities meter, it never travels across public transmission lines, and it doesn't rely on the broader regional grid for stability.
Got it.
To scale it down, think of a residential house with a massive array of solar panels and a battery wall in the garage. Those panels power the house directly, rather than pulling electricity from the wires on the telephone pole out on the street. Now take that concept and scale it up to a massive industrial gigawatt level.
So instead of a tech company building a sprawling data center and then calling up the local utility to demand they route 500 megawatts of power to the site, which would require years of municipal planning, seizing land for right-of-ways, and building new high-voltage towers, the tech company just builds its own private power plant right next door to the server farm.
Precisely. They might build a dedicated, high-efficiency natural gas plant. They might build a massive solar farm paired with industrial-scale battery storage. Or even, as some major tech companies are currently and seriously exploring, they might deploy small modular nuclear reactors exclusively to power a single data center.
Nuclear reactors. Wow.
Yeah. By generating the power entirely on-site and behind the meter, they bypass the public grid and the public utility monopolies entirely. This accomplishes two massive goals for the framework. First, it fulfills the ratepayer protection pledge. If the data center isn't drawing from the local grid, it doesn't trigger grid upgrades, and local residential rates don't go up.
And the second goal.
Second, and perhaps more importantly for the goal of global dominance, it radically accelerates the build-out timeline.
Because they completely sidestep the utility company's notoriously slow, decade-long planning and construction cycles. They just buy the land and build the power.
Exactly. The framework explicitly notes this strategy will accelerate AI infrastructure build-out and enhance grid reliability. The broader public grid is actually more reliable because the massive AI data center isn't suddenly drawing down public resources and causing brownouts during a summer heat wave.
That makes total sense.
But to make this behind-the-meter vision a reality, the framework explicitly tells Congress they must streamline federal permitting. Currently, building a dedicated power plant right next to a data center requires navigating an absolute labyrinth of federal environmental reviews, emission standards, and endless regulatory red tape. The framework wants a federal fast track specifically designed for AI infrastructure.
It is a stunning vision of energy independence, but it's not independence for the country as a whole. It's bespoke energy independence for the specific tech companies building the future. But the framework doesn't just view this massive physical infrastructure through a domestic economic lens. It ties this physical capability directly and explicitly to national security.
Yes. The document clearly instructs Congress to ensure that the appropriate agencies within the national security enterprise possess the sufficient technical capacity to fully understand the capabilities of these frontier AI models.
Which makes terrifying sense. If an AI model trained in a behind-the-meter data center becomes powerful enough to autonomously discover novel chemical compounds or write undetectable zero-day malware or perfectly coordinate global logistics, the intelligence community and the military absolutely need to understand exactly how the machine is doing it.
And the framework pushes it even further. It says these national security agencies must establish concrete plans to mitigate potential concerns, specifically noting this must be done, including through consultation with frontier AI model developers.
Oh, interesting.
This is at a subtle but incredibly profound policy shift. The federal government is openly acknowledging that the absolute cutting-edge expertise for these systems doesn't live in the basement of the Pentagon or the headquarters of the CIA. It lives in the private sector. The national security apparatus has to humble itself, sit down at the table with the private developers, the people actually pouring the concrete for those data centers to truly understand the modern threat landscape.
It's a partnership born out of sheer technological necessity. But the framework also seems acutely aware that it doesn't want AI to exclusively be the domain of massive monopolistic tech giants and the Defense Department. It includes a strong economic push for everyday, Main Street American businesses.
Right.
It recommends Congress provide dedicated AI resources to small businesses, specifically listing mechanisms like federal grants, tax incentives, and targeted technical assistance programs to actively support the much wider deployment of AI tools across the broader American industry.
This is the core of the economic dominance argument. The authors of the framework recognize that artificial intelligence is what economists call a general-purpose technology. It is akin to the invention of the steam engine, or electricity itself.
It changes everything.
Yes, it's not just a new product. It's a new way of making every product. A small 5-person accounting firm in Ohio or medium-sized auto parts manufacturing plant in Texas needs to be able to seamlessly integrate AI into their daily workflow just to stay competitive in the global market.
Otherwise, they get left behind.
Exactly. If the barrier to entry is so high that only the massive trillion-dollar corporations can afford to deploy AI tools, the broader American economy will stagnate and consolidate. Tax incentives and federal grants are designed to artificially lower that barrier to adoption, ensuring the technology trickles down to small businesses quickly.
So, we've covered the human element, ensuring the vulnerable are protected. We've explored the massive physical energy and infrastructure required to actually power these supercomputers. But that brings us to the third, perhaps most highly contested ingredient in the entire AI recipe.
The data.
Exactly. We've talked about physical energy, but now we have to transition to the creative energy. The unfathomable, massive oceans of data, the text, the copyrighted books, the photographs, the human-generated videos that are absolutely required to train these frontier models to be smart in the first place. Who actually owns the output of human creativity once it has been digested by a machine?
This brings us to Section 3 of the framework, respecting intellectual property rights and supporting creators. And I cannot overstate this. It tackles what is currently the single most contentious, high-stakes legal battle happening in the technology sector today.
It truly does. And I have to admit, when I first read this specific section, I had to read it twice. It contains a massive, legally explosive aha moment buried right in the very first bullet point.
Oh, I know exactly which one you mean.
Yeah. The framework states, and I want to quote this very closely so we get the exact nuance, although the administration believes that training of AI models on copyrighted material does not violate copyright laws. Let's just pause right there.
It is a stunningly definitive, incredibly consequential statement of belief from the executive branch.
Yeah. It is absolute legal dynamite. Right now, as we speak, major news organizations, best-selling authors, independent artists, and massive record labels are all actively suing AI companies in federal court for billions of dollars. They are aggressively arguing that scraping their copyrighted work off the internet to train these models is outright, undeniable theft on an industrial scale. And right here, in this official blueprint, the administration is explicitly stating its belief that the fundamental mechanical act of training an AI model on copyrighted material is not a violation of the law.
What's truly fascinating here is the precise political and legal nuance of how they handle that explosive belief, because they state their position clearly, but then they execute an immediate, graceful pivot.
Right.
The framework continues. It acknowledges arguments to the contrary exist and therefore supports allowing the courts to resolve this issue.
They plant their flags, state their opinion, and then immediately wash their hands of it and pass the buck entirely to the judicial system.
Exactly. And they go even further to ensure Congress stays completely out of the crossfire. The framework explicitly instructs lawmakers. Congress should not take any legislative actions that would impact the judiciary's ultimate resolution of whether training on copyrighted material legally constitutes fair use.
Let's break down fair use for a second, because that's the legal fulcrum this whole multi-billion-dollar debate rests on. Fair use is the legal doctrine in the United States that allows for the limited, unlicensed use of copyrighted material under certain specific conditions, like quoting a paragraph in a book review, or using a clip in a news broadcast, or creating a parody.
Right, the classic examples.
The AI companies are in court arguing that having their algorithms analyze millions of copyrighted images to mathematically learn what the concept of a cat looks like is the ultimate example of fair use. They argue they aren't reproducing the original copyrighted cat photograph to sell it. They are simply extracting the mathematical patterns of catness. It's highly transformative.
And on the other side, the original creators argue that without their massive portfolios of original human-created cat images, the AI would be an empty, useless shell. They argue the AI is entirely derivative of their labor, and therefore they deserve financial compensation.
Which also makes sense. It does.
The framework looks at this incredibly complex existential legal battle and tells Congress, do not touch this. Do not write a new, modernized copyright law specifically for artificial intelligence. Do not put your legislative thumb on the scale. Step back and let the slow, methodical, precedent-based churn of the federal court system decide if algorithmic training is fair use.
It's a massive gamble on the existing judicial system. But the framework isn't totally cold-blooded toward the creators whose work is being ingested. It offers a very interesting, highly specific olive branch regarding future compensation.
The collective bargaining part.
Yeah. It tells Congress they should actively consider enabling licensing frameworks or collective rights systems that would allow rights holders to collectively negotiate compensation from AI providers. But here is the absolutely crucial phrase tagged on the end. Quote, without incurring antitrust liability.
This raises a fundamental economic question about how power and leverage actually work in the modern digital economy. Let's say you are an incredibly talented, independent freelance illustrator. You have absolutely zero leverage to demand payment or licensing fees from a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate that quietly scraped your entire online portfolio to train their new image generator.
Right. If you try to negotiate, they won't even reply to your email. You are a microscopic drop in their ocean of data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But hypothetically, if every freelance illustrator in the country and every professional photographer and every major journalist banded together to form a massive unified collective, the power dynamic shifts.
There's power in numbers.
Yes. They could collectively say to the AI developers, if you want legal, unfettered access to our clean, high-quality, human-generated data to train your next frontier model, you have to pay this specific collective licensing fee. The major legal hurdle is that, under current American law, if thousands of independent competing businesses openly collude to fix a standard price for their goods, they can be aggressively sued by the Department of Justice for antitrust violations. They are essentially forming an illegal cartel.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that. So the framework is asking Congress to create a specific, targeted antitrust carve-out just for content creators facing down AI. It's essentially saying, we are going to give independent artists and writers the legal safety to effectively unionize, form a cartel, and collectively bargain with the AI giants without the federal government busting them for acting like a monopoly.
That is the exact mechanism they are proposing. But notice the very careful caveat placed at the very end of that specific bullet point. It states, any such legislation, however, should not address when or whether such licensing is required.
Ah, the catch. So Congress is encouraged to build the legal table for the creators and the tech companies to sit at, and they are allowed to guarantee the creators won't be arrested for sitting there together. Well, excuse me, they won't be arrested for sitting there together. But Congress absolutely cannot legally force the AI companies to actually sit down at that table or mandate that they actually pay a licensing fee. It merely gives the creators the legal armor to try and force a negotiation. It is an incredibly hands-off, pure, free market approach to the problem.
It is. But while the blueprint is notably hands-off and deferential regarding the input the massive datasets use for training, it takes a substantially harder, much more protective legal stance on the outputs of the AI, specifically regarding the protection of human identity.
Yes, the issue of digital replicas. The framework explicitly asks Congress to consider establishing a robust federal framework designed to protect individuals from the unauthorized distribution or commercial use of AI-generated digital replicas of their voice, their visual likeness, or other uniquely identifiable attributes.
This is deeply fundamentally important. We talked earlier about those terrifying AI impersonation scams targeting seniors for financial fraud. This section addresses the broader, legitimate commercial application of that exact same underlying technology.
Right.
Imagine a scenario where a major car company uses an incredibly realistic AI clone of a famous, recognizable actor's voice to narrate their new national television commercial. But they never ask the actor for permission, and they certainly never pay them a talent fee. That is a clear, egregious violation of that individual's fundamental right to control and profit from their own likeness. The framework wants strict federal protection to make that illegal nationwide.
Okay, I completely understand the commercial protection aspect, but I have a major scenario I want to throw at you.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I'm not a multinational car company trying to save a buck on voiceover talent. Let's say I'm just a guy on the internet and I use a commercially available AI tool to perfectly clone the voice of a highly controversial sitting politician. And I use that cloned voice to recite the lyrics to a ridiculous bubblegum pop song, and I post it online purely as a joke to mock them. It is totally unauthorized. It is unequivocally a digital replica of their identifiable attributes. Am I going to be federally prosecuted under this proposed framework?
The authors of the framework clearly anticipated exactly this kind of cultural collision, and they drew a very firm, non-negotiable legal line in the sand regarding the First Amendment. The text states explicitly that any federal framework protecting digital replicas absolutely must provide clear exceptions for parody, satire, news reporting, and other expressive works protected by the First Amendment.
So the absurd pop song joke is fully protected.
Yes. Your AI-generated video of the politician singing pop music is legally categorized as satire or parody, and therefore it is protected, constitutionally guaranteed free speech. Now, if you cloned that same politician's voice and had them explicitly endorse a specific brand of energy drink that you were selling on your website, that immediately crosses the line into commercial use, and you are violating their federal rights.
That distinction makes a lot of sense.
And the framework goes even further to shield speech. It specifically warns Congress that it must prevent persons from abusing such a framework to stifle free speech online.
Meaning a thin-skinned politician or a sensitive celebrity cannot just vaguely shout unauthorized digital replica as a legal loophole to force a social media platform to take down a video that simply makes fun of them.
Exactly. The framework is deeply terrified of the prospect of copyright laws or likeness protections being quietly weaponized by the powerful as backdoor tools for political or cultural censorship.
And that absolute insistence on fiercely protecting parody, satire, and unfiltered free speech serves as the perfect bridge into the next major overarching theme of the document. We are moving away from the physical grid infrastructure, and we are moving past the intellectual property debates, and we are entering the pure realm of information control itself. Let's look at how the framework views the flow of human communication.
We are looking at Section 4, Preventing Censorship and Protecting Free Speech. And I must say, the framework takes an incredibly aggressive, completely uncompromising stance here regarding the role of government intervention in how AI platforms operate.
It outlines what is essentially a massive anti-coercion mandate. The rule provided to Congress is explicit and blunt. Lawmakers must enact rules to completely prevent the United States government from coercing technology providers, specifically including AI developers, to ban, to compel, or to alter content based on partisan or ideological agendas.
If we look at the broader historical context of the last few years of social media, there has been endless, bitter controversy and congressional hearings about various government agencies quietly communicating with tech platforms.
Oh, yeah. Constantly.
Agencies flagging certain posts or specific users for removal or suppression under the stated guise of combating foreign misinformation or protecting public health. The framework is looking at that highly contentious recent history and declaring we absolutely cannot let that exact same dynamic take root within the foundational layer of artificial intelligence.
To put a real-world analogy on this dynamic, it's like a powerful city mayor being legally banned from walking into a small, local independent bookstore and suggesting they move certain controversial books to the dusty back room, or suggesting they put a specific political biography prominently in the front display window.
That's a great way to picture it.
Because the mayor has the massive inherent power of the government behind them, the ability to order fire inspections or revoke business licenses, even a polite suggestion to the bookstore owner carries the implicit heavy threat of government coercion. The framework wants to make it explicitly illegal for any federal agency to play that coercive role with the developers building our AI platforms.
That analogy perfectly captures the power dynamic at play, because we have to remember, AI isn't just another software application. It is rapidly becoming the primary, singular lens through which citizens access and interpret reality.
Right. We just ask the AI instead of searching.
Exactly. If you ask a highly advanced AI chatbot to explain a deeply controversial historical event or a complex political topic, the specific phrasing, the context, and the facts it chooses to highlight in its generated answer fundamentally shape your understanding of the truth. If a government agency possesses the legal or informal power to secretly coerce the AI company, to subtly alter how its algorithm weighs those answers, to make the AI lean toward a specific, administration-approved partisan agenda that represents a profound, almost dystopian level of societal control.
It really does.
Controlling the AI effectively means controlling the flow of human information.
And what's really striking is that the framework doesn't just stop at wagging a finger and telling the government don't do it. It actively demands a legal mechanism for the American public to fight back if the government breaks the rule. The text says Congress must provide an effective means for Americans to seek redress from the federal government for agency efforts to censor expression on AI platforms or dictate the information provided by an AI platform.
Redress is the critical legal word there. It means providing the citizenry with a concrete ability to sue the federal government, to drag them into court, and hold them legally and financially accountable for overreach.
It is a massive citizen empowerment clause.
It really is.
If an investigative journalist or a private citizen uncovers hard evidence that a federal agency secretly pressured an AI company to alter its guardrails to suppress lawful political dissent, that citizen should have a clear, federally protected path to take the government to court and win.
It is a deeply fascinating philosophical approach. The framework is obviously concerned with the raw, unchecked power of artificial intelligence itself. But reading this section, it seems equally, if not significantly more, terrified of the power of the government using AI as a tool to shape narratives and suppress dissent.
Which perfectly sets up the massive structural question that dominates the next section of the blueprint. Think about the cumulative effect of what we've just discussed. If the federal government is being explicitly ordered to keep its hands completely off speech moderation, and it is purposefully leaving the multi-billion-dollar copyright decisions entirely to the slow churn of the courts, wait, how does the federal government actually plan to regulate the day-to-day nuts and bolts of how this world-altering technology operates?
The answer is shocking in its simplicity. By getting completely and utterly out of the way, we are looking at sections V and 6 of the framework, which extensively cover innovation, American AI dominance, and the future of the workforce. And right here, buried in the text, we get what I believe is the single biggest structural bombshell in the entire legislative blueprint.
It is a definitive, unyielding answer to a massive structural question that the global tech industry has been agonizing over for the last 3 years.
The framework states, plainly and without caveat, Congress should not create any new federal rulemaking body to regulate AI.
Let the weight of that statement truly sink in. No massive new Department of Artificial Intelligence in Washington, D.C. No sprawling federal AI commission packed with newly appointed bureaucrats.
None of it.
I have to stop and ask the obvious question, though. If we completely abandon the idea of an FDA for AI or an FAA for AI, who is actually sitting at the control console steering the ship, who is legally responsible for making sure the new AI diagnostic software at the hospital doesn't give a patient lethal medical advice, or ensuring the AI autopilot doesn't crash commercial airliner.
The framework explicitly explains its deep reliance on existing legacy regulatory structures. It instructs Congress to instead support development and deployment of sector-specific AI applications through existing regulatory bodies with subject matter expertise and through industry-led standards.
Ah, okay. The key phrase there is sector-specific.
Yeah.
So, if a tech startup builds a revolutionary new AI model designed exclusively to analyze MRI scans and diagnose tumors, the existing FDA regulates it because the FDA already possesses decades of institutional knowledge on how to evaluate and regulate medical devices. If a company builds an AI to manage the logistics of self-driving semi-trucks, the existing Department of Transportation handles the safety protocols.
Precisely. The underlying philosophy here is that artificial intelligence is simply too broad, too nebulous, and too deeply integrated into every facet of life to be effectively governed by a single monolithic centralized agency.
It would just be too big.
Right. A brand new AI agency in Washington wouldn't possibly understand the incredibly dense nuances of international banking regulations, IPI healthcare privacy laws, and aviation safety standards all at once. By permanently delegating the oversight to the existing sector-specific legacy agencies, the government relies on the veteran experts who already intimately understand the catastrophic risks of their specific narrow field.
That makes practical sense.
And notice the second half of that directive. It specifically mentions relying on industry-led standards. The framework is placing a massive amount of trust in the private developers to set the highly technical safety benchmarks themselves.
It is an overwhelming vote of confidence in the efficiency of the free market and the competence of the existing bureaucracy. It's entirely about removing friction from the system. The framework argues that the United States can only achieve global dominance by ruthlessly removing bureaucratic barriers to rapid innovation. And it offers lawmakers a very specific, highly effective tool to accomplish that: regulatory sandboxes. The text explicitly asks Congress to establish these designated sandboxes specifically for AI applications to help unleash American ingenuity.
The concept of a regulatory sandbox is fascinating, and it originally gained a lot of traction in the financial technology or fintech sector. Think of it literally like a designated, heavily monitored safe zone for radical innovation.
Okay, like a test zone.
Yeah. Normally, if an ambitious startup wants to test a radically new AI-driven algorithmic trading product, they have to spend millions of dollars and years of time complying with a mountain of SEC banking regulations before they even know if the underlying software actually works. In a regulatory sandbox, the government agrees to temporarily waive certain strict rules or suspend heavy reporting requirements for a specific, tightly controlled period of time within a limited environment with volunteer users.
So it basically lets the ambitious developers play in the sandbox, figure out the complicated tech, push it to its limits, and see if it accidentally breaks anything, all without the terrifying threat of a federal regulator instantly dropping a $10 million compliance fine on their heads for a minor technical violation.
Exactly. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. It allows the slow-moving regulators to actively watch the cutting-edge technology develop and fail in real time, sitting side by side with the innovators, rather than fruitlessly trying to guess what rules they should write for technology that hasn't even been invented yet. It immensely accelerates the timeline from conceptual development to real-world deployment.
And to pour absolute rocket fuel on that rapid deployment, the framework wants the federal government to give the private tech industry a truly massive, unprecedented gift: raw data. The blueprint recommends that Congress provide substantial resources to immediately make vast troves of federal data sets accessible to private industry and academia in AI-ready formats, specifically for use in training new frontier AI models.
This cannot be overstated. This is a monumental economic subsidy. The United States government currently sits on arguably the most valuable, most extensive, and most historically deep troves of raw data in the entire world.
How easily?
They have a century of hyper-detailed weather patterns, granular demographic shifts from the Census Bureau, deep geological surveys, decades of agricultural yield data, and vast oceans of anonymized public health statistics. But historically, this treasure trove of data is locked away in incredibly clunky, severely outdated digital formats, unsearchable scanned PDFs, or ancient database architectures from the 1990s.
Stuff that's basically useless to an algorithm today.
Exactly. The framework is ordering the government: spend the money to clean this data up, reformat it specifically so modern machine learning algorithms can ingest and digest it instantly via APIs, and hand it over to the private sector and universities for free. It is a massive, taxpayer-funded subsidy of the raw material required for American AI dominance.
But with all this unprecedented rapid innovation, all this raw data fueling models, and all this deliberate regulatory friction being removed, what about the average American worker? What about the millions of people terrified that this technology is coming for their livelihood?
That is the big question, isn't it?
It is. Section 6 of the framework focuses entirely on educating Americans and developing an AI-ready workforce. And, keeping perfectly in sync with the overarching theme of the document, it favors a remarkably light, non-coercive touch. It explicitly tells Congress they should rely on non-regulatory methods to ensure that existing education and workforce training programs, specifically including trade apprenticeships, affirmatively incorporate AI training into their curriculum.
Non-regulatory methods is the operative phrase. Again, they are adamantly refusing to write a law, forcing private companies to retrain their workers. They are utilizing carrots, entirely ignoring the sticks.
Right.
The goal is for the existing, highly successful apprenticeship programs for blue-collar and white-collar trades, electricians, plumbers, paralegals, medical assistants, to organically start teaching their apprentices how to utilize AI co-pilots in their daily practical work.
And there is a very specific, highly academic phrase the framework utilizes in this section that I found incredibly insightful regarding the future of labor. It instructs Congress to expand federal efforts to study the ongoing trends in task-level workforce realignment driven by the integration of AI.
Task-level workforce realignment. That is, without a doubt, the most precise, accurate description of the incoming AI job market shock that I have seen articulated in a high-level policy document.
Because it cuts through the hysteria and acknowledges the nuanced reality of the situation. The prevailing cultural narrative is always the terrifying headline, AI is going to steal your job. But task-level workforce realignment recognizes that AI very rarely replaces an entire human being outright. Instead, it rapidly replaces specific, usually repetitive tasks within their broader job description.
Exactly. Let's look at the classic example of a medical radiologist. A highly advanced visual AI model might not completely replace the human radiologist, but it will absolutely unequivocally take over the specific task of doing the initial pixel-by-pixel scan of the X-ray to flag microscopic anomalies. The AI does that task in milliseconds.
Right, something that would take human hours.
Exactly. That massive efficiency gain leaves the human radiologist with vastly more time to perform the deeply human tasks of complex holistic diagnosis, empathetic patient consultation, and consulting with surgeons. The overarching job title doesn't disappear. The daily tasks are radically realigned. The framework wants the federal government to deeply study exactly how these specific microtasks are shifting across hundreds of industries, so they can actually formulate intelligent policies to support the workers in transition.
And to physically execute this massive educational support system, the framework calls on a very specific, historically significant set of institutions. It dictates that Congress should bolster capabilities at land-grant institutions to provide technical assistance, launch demonstration projects, and develop AI youth development programs. Why specifically highlight land-grant institutions? Why not just funnel the money to MIT or Stanford or the Ivy League?
This is a brilliant, deeply historical, strategic move. Land-grant universities, massive institutions like Texas A&M, Ohio State, Purdue, and dozens of others were originally established in the mid-19th century under the Morrill Act with a very specific populist mission.
Okay, what was that mission?
Their goal was to teach agriculture, practical science, and engineering directly to the working class, fundamentally democratizing higher education. Because of that unique history, they have massive, deeply embedded extension networks that reach directly out of the academic bubble and into rural farming communities, small-town manufacturing hubs, and local county offices.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they had that kind of reach.
They really do.
Yeah.
By specifically utilizing the legacy network of land-grant institutions, the framework ensures that this vital AI technical assistance isn't just trapped within the wealthy coastal enclaves of Silicon Valley or elite private universities. It explicitly pushes the technology, the training, and the youth development programs directly into the geographic and economic heartland of America.
It's a deliberate strategy to ensure the entire country feels the economic benefit of AI-driven growth, theoretically preventing a populist backlash against the technology. So let's look at the totality of what we've built so far.
A lot.
It is. We have a massive federal blueprint that is aggressively, almost militantly hands-off. No new central regulatory agency. Heavy reliance on the slow-moving courts to figure out copyright. Free-flowing data and regulatory sandboxes to let developers run wild. Our reliance on task-level workforce realignment handled by heartland universities. But this specific combination of policies creates a massive, undeniable political tension. If the federal government is purposefully stepping back, refusing to regulate, and intentionally creating a massive regulatory power vacuum, both human nature and political nature dictate that someone else is going to step in and try to aggressively fill that exact void.
Politics abhors a vacuum just as much as nature does. And in the complex system of the United States, when the federal government steps back, that regulatory vacuum is almost instantaneously filled by 50 highly ambitious individual state legislatures.
Which perfectly brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most legally contentious, high-stakes battleground in the entire document. We are talking about an all-out turf war, federal supremacy versus state rights. Section 7 of the framework is bluntly titled, Establishing a Federal Policy Framework, Preempting Cumbersome State AI Laws. and it does not mince a single word about its intentions.
It is a massive, calculated, preemptive legal strike against state-level tech regulation.
The framework argues that Congress must firmly establish a supreme federal policy framework to protect American rights and support innovation, and in doing so, it must aggressively prevent a fragmented patchwork of state regulations that would hinder our national competitiveness. It explicitly demands that Congress completely preempt any state AI laws that impose undue burdens to ensure the entire country operates under a single, minimally burdensome national standard, one rulebook, not 50 discordant, conflicting ones.
If we step back and look at the chaotic reality on the ground right now, state legislatures are moving incredibly fast. California has been actively trying to pass its own massive, highly restrictive AI safety and testing bills. Colorado has already passed complex AI anti-discrimination laws regarding hiring. Utah is passing strict AI transparency laws.
It's all over the place.
It really is. For an ambitious software developer trying to launch a single nationwide AI product while simultaneously trying to navigate and comply with 50 different highly technical and often directly contradictory sets of legal rules is an absolute paralyzing nightmare. It drastically increases legal costs and stifles nationwide deployment. The framework is forcefully demanding that Congress create a single, unified, minimally burdensome federal standard that effectively wipes the slate clean and legally overrides all of these ambitious state laws.
But this is the United States. The concept of federalism, the shared power between the national government and the states, is a foundational constitutional principle. The federal government cannot simply wave a magic wand and delete the inherent authority of the state governments entirely. And to its credit, the framework acknowledges this constitutional reality. It outlines a very careful, highly nuanced vision of federalism. It details specific, protected carve-outs, outlining exactly what the states are still legally allowed to do.
Yes, the text of the framework is very careful to explicitly state that this new supreme national standard absolutely must respect key principles of federalism.
First, on that ladder of allowed powers, it states the federal government will absolutely not preempt the traditional police powers retained by the states to enforce laws of general applicability against AI developers and users. And it provides clear examples of those traditional powers, protecting children, preventing financial fraud, and aggressively protecting consumers.
We saw this philosophy explicitly laid out back in sections 1 and 2. The state of Florida, or the state of New York, absolutely still retains the unimpeded power to arrest you and throw you in state prison for generating child exploitation material, or for running an AI-driven voice cloning scam against a local senior citizen.
Right.
Those are foundational traditional police powers. You do not need a brand new, highly technical artificial intelligence law to legally prosecute fraud. Fraud is fraud, and theft is theft, regardless of how advanced the digital tool used to commit the crime was. The states fundamentally retain their sovereign right to fiercely enforce basic criminal code and consumer protection laws.
Second on the list of protected state powers, the framework protects state zoning laws, including state authorities, to determine the placement of AI infrastructure.
This specific carve-out ties directly back to those massive city-sized data centers we discussed extensively earlier. The federal government desperately wants to streamline the environmental permits and fast-track the behind-the-meter power plants to achieve energy dominance.
But they can't just build wherever they want.
Exactly. They legally concede that the local town council, or the state environmental board, absolutely still retains the sovereign right to look at a tech giant and say, no, you cannot physically build this 50-acre humming data center in the middle of a quiet residential neighborhood or on top of a protected, ecologically sensitive wetland. Local zoning firmly remains a local power.
And third, the framework explicitly protects requirements governing a state's own use of AI, whether through procurement or services they provide like law enforcement and public education.
Meaning, if the sovereign state of Texas wants to pass a sweeping state law dictating that the Texas Highway Patrol is permanently banned from using AI facial recognition software, or that the Texas public school system is strictly forbidden from utilizing AI automated grading for student essays, they are entirely free to do so. The state government ultimately controls its own taxpayer checkbook, and it absolutely controls the operational rules of its own public agencies.
To put a comprehensive analogy on this incredibly complex, high-stakes legal dynamic between the feds and the states, it is essentially the federal government looking down at the state capitals and saying, listen closely. You retain the ultimate authority to decide exactly where the massive AI data center is physically built in your county. You retain the complete authority to decide if your local police department is legally allowed to buy the software running inside it.
Yeah.
And you retain the absolute authority to throw a citizen in state prison if they use that software to commit financial fraud.
Right.
But, and this is a massive, impenetrable ban, but you absolutely, under no circumstances, can pass a law telling the tech company how to write the underlying code.
That is precisely the boundary line being drawn in the sand. And the framework makes that specific boundary crystal clear by outlining 3 strict, non-negotiable prohibitions for the states, 3 specific regulatory actions they absolutely cannot take.
Let's unpack those 3 strict bans in detail, because this is where the legal hammer really drops. First, the framework states, states should not be permitted to regulate AI development because it is an inherently interstate phenomenon with key foreign policy and national security implications.
This is the absolute legal kill shot aimed directly at comprehensive state laws like California's proposed AI safety regulations. The federal government is aggressively asserting that the complex, multi-billion-dollar process of training a frontier AI model isn't a quaint, localized, intrastate issue. It is fundamentally an issue of massive interstate commerce, and even more importantly, it is intrinsically tied to the grand national strategy for global geopolitical dominance.
The stakes are too high for a state-by-state approach.
Exactly. A single ambitious state legislature simply cannot be allowed to dictate the core safety testing protocols or mandate the technical guardrails for a foundational technology that directly impacts the national security of the entire country.
The second strict ban is equally profound. States should not unduly burden Americans' use of AI for activity that would be lawful if performed without AI.
This touches on a profound, underlying philosophical point about human liberty and technology. If it is perfectly unequivocally legal for me to sit down and write a bizarre science fiction novel using a cheap ballpoint pen and a legal pad, a state legislature cannot suddenly pass a law declaring that it is illegal or heavily taxed or intensely burdened by reporting requirements for me to write that exact same science fiction novel utilizing an AI text generator as my writing partner.
Because the end result is the same.
Right. The nature of the modern visual tool I choose to use should not and cannot suddenly criminalize or burden the underlying inherently lawful behavior.
And the final, incredibly consequential strict ban. States should not be permitted to penalize AI developers for a third party's unlawful conduct involving their models.
This is the holy grail for the tech industry, the ultimate impenetrable liability shield. It connects directly back to the concept of AI as a fundamental general-purpose tool. If a tech company builds an incredibly powerful open-source AI language model and releases it to the public, and a sophisticated international criminal uses that exact model to mass-produce highly convincing, multilingual phishing emails that successfully rob a regional bank, the state government cannot allow the victims to sue the original developers who built the model.
Even if the tool made it easier for the criminal.
Exactly. It is legally akin to stating you cannot sue the manufacturer of a fast car just because the bank robber used it as their getaway vehicle. The legal and financial liability rests entirely, 100%, with the bad actor committing the crime, not the developer of the foundational mathematical tool.
It is a complete, absolute insulation of the developers from the chaotic, unpredictable actions of the end users.
It is. And when you step back and look at the totality of all 3 of these strict bans working in concert, preventing states from regulating the core development, preventing them from legally burdening lawful use, and completely shielding the developers from third-party legal liability, it creates an incredibly protected, frictionless, hyper-accelerated environment for AI companies to operate on a massive national scale.
So after exploring the depths of this text, what does this all truly mean? We have meticulously walked through the entirety of this massive 7-part legislative blueprint. We started with the immediate, visceral human reality, the desperate need to protect the privacy of children and the life savings of seniors from the darkest, most deceptive applications of generative AI. We then pivoted to explore the staggering physical reality required to make this tech possible. The mandate for energy dominance, the bold ratepayer protection pledge, and the radical vision of behind-the-meter off-grid power generation. We dove deep into the incredibly fraught creator's dilemma, examining the administration's explosive claim that algorithmic training isn't copyright infringement, while leaving the messy billion-dollar reality entirely to the courts, all while offering fascinating antitrust carve-outs to allow artists to form cartels for collective bargaining.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. And then we witnessed a fierce, uncompromising defense of the First Amendment, establishing an anti-coercion mandate to legally block the government from forcing tech platforms to censor legal speech or quietly push partisan agendas. We discovered a sprawling vision of rapid innovation driven not by a new monolithic AI bureaucracy, but by delegating power to existing sector-specific experts, unleashing regulatory sandboxes, and acknowledging the reality of task-level workforce realignment fueled by the historic reach of land-grant universities. And finally, we witnessed an absolute, unapologetic assertion of federal supremacy, aggressively preempting 50 discordant state laws to essentially bulldoze a single, completely unobstructed runway for American AI developers to take off.
It is a remarkably cohesive, overwhelmingly aggressive, and fiercely focused vision. It is nothing less than a master blueprint for achieving absolute, unassailable American AI dominance through the precise application of minimal federal interference, the incentivization of massive physical infrastructure build-outs, and the strict, non-negotiable limitation on state-level regulation. It relies deeply on the existing pillars of American society, the slow deliberation of the courts, the focused expertise of legacy agencies, and the ruthless efficiency of the free market to handle the inevitable societal fallout and the messy day-to-day implementation.
It is a truly fascinating, deeply consequential approach to governing what is undeniably the most disruptive and powerful technology of our lifetime. And digging into the actual mechanics of this framework leaves us with an incredible amount to think about regarding exactly how our society, our economy, and our legal rights will be fundamentally shaped in the coming years.
It certainly does. And if we connect the sprawling architecture of everything we've explored today, the impenetrable liability shields, the absolute refusal to create a new central oversight agency, the aggressive preemption of ambitious state laws, and the total deferment to the judicial system on the existential questions of copyright and ownership. It raises one final incredibly important question for you, the listener, to deeply mull over as you watch this legislation inevitably unfold in Congress.
What's that?
Well, if the framework explicitly prevents the states from regulating AI development, forcefully tells the federal government to keep its hands off speech and not to create a new agency, and leaves the fundamental economic issues to the slow churn of the courts. Wait, does this framework actually regulate artificial intelligence, or does it effectively hand the keys to the future directly and exclusively to the developers themselves?
That is a brilliant, unsettling question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the legislative blueprint of our immediate future. Keep intensely questioning the information landscape around you, and we'll see you next time. And remember, the speed limit signs on this new highway haven't even been built